how hard was it? How challenging was it to write about someone, who's so well known in the New York media?
Yeah, I think that was the thing that I was first, a little bit concerned about because, like you mentioned, Madden had his book. I mean, Dick Schaap wrote a terrific biography of him. There's been a million other things where George was a leading role in a book about those era of the Yankees. But you know, I talked to a lot of younger generation fans, and frankly, I talked to a lot of guys of our years, guys who kind of have selective amnesia about these things and kind of forget. When they think of George, they tend to think of the older George who would walk in to Yankee Stadium to just, unbridled affection and love. And of course, he would take that same walk, 10 years earlier, and the words were a lot different, and the chanting was a lot different, and
Right.
the sentiment was a lot different because he was a reviled owner for a lot of years. And to me, that's what makes a person delicious to talk about as a subject. Is
Right.
you have all these facets, all these different parts of George that were very much true. I mean, he was reviled and on merit. He was beloved and on merit, and he was all the things in between. And so, to me, when you start looking at that, I mean, I knew I didn't want to write his biography because, like we've said, biographies had been written. I didn't want to spend a lot of time with George at Cleveland or in college or, doing his assistant coaching thing early in his career. But I wanted to write about what it was like the Yankees became when he became part of the team, January 3rd, 1973, and to present day when you incorporate the Hal Steinbrenner years. So it is bosses. It's about both, but I think it's interesting if you see the cover of the book. George is about four times as big. His picture is Hal, and that's probably right on. Not only in terms of how long George was the owner of the team, but also how we tend to think about those guys because George was larger than life and Hal is not, and that's not a criticism of Hal by any stretch. In fact, I think one of his great assets as an owner is that he's not his father. Some would argue with that, but I mean, to me, that's why the whole subject matter to me was so interesting. You get a slice of what the Yankees have been like from the very beginning of George's involvement with the team.
You know, Mike, you mentioned before there have been other books written about George and Yankee ownership, and I think when somebody writes a book about a subject, or when there's a documentary about a subject, and the person who's reading or watching, you think you know everything about that person. You're a fan of the team. You followed this person, and when it comes to George Steinbrenner, I think a lot of Yankee fans know a lot about him or knew a lot about him. Without giving away too much in the book, give us a little breadcrumb of something about George that Yankee fans may not have known about him, but they will find out in the book.
Peter, thank you for saying that, and that's about as nice a thing